Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 10 Week 4 Power Rankings. We've hit our halfway point, and it's time to talk about some of the teams that are showing off what they're made of. I am IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. Joining me, as always, is SteveChuck, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Yes, I'm here.
And once again, we're going over our top 4 teams. There were a lot of high-tier matchups between some of the best teams, and we're going to dive right into seeing what we've ranked as our top teams. And we do have a slight change at the top here. We have put the Newport Noctuls back up at number 1 after flip-flopping with the Summit County Psyducks last week. We have flip-flopped them back. We'll go into a little bit of depth about why we did that. Once again, we have the Route 1 Burbs down at number 3. And oh, look who makes a re-entry on the list. It is your Buffalo Bouffalant. We'll talk about that match briefly. But we also have to talk about some of the teams to watch for as well, because all of those teams also played some of the top 4. So we figure we can cover them all at once. The Waterdeep Wobbuffets down there at about number 5 or so. The Close Combat Club and the Seattle Steamrollers, watching out our teams to watch. So we're going to go right into the first team. The number 1 team we've got are the Newport Noctuls, who did face the Seattle Steamrollers, who we do have on our to-watch list. But we're here to talk about the 3-0 victory from Jimmy and the Noctuls. We're a team of Decidueye, Aromatisse, Mudsdale, Pincurchin, Raichu-Alola, and the Blaziken. And once again, a 3-0 victory. The tone was set early by that Mudsdale. Mudsdale putting in a ton of work for him, especially in the early game. It seems like it's week after week after week. It's putting in all the work, all the pressure that he needs. Setting up those rocks early, aggressive plays overall, just so impressive. Getting the body press off onto Tauros. It was a little bit of a questionable stay in, having Tauros stay in, but because it did, Mudsdale was able to get the body press off the +1 body press because of stamina and get that into the threshold where later, for it to set up rocks the next turn on the switch out, it could not switch back into rocks. Got another KO post-mortem as well, as Cinccino later also fell to those rocks. Mudsdale also got an easy KO trade later with the Glow King after a suspect Trick Room. Again, a little bit of a suspect play off setting up Trick Room with the Glow King. Kind of a cool set, but with a Pincurchin, a Mudsdale, and an Aromatisse, who also we found out had Trick Room itself, seems just a little bit suspect, and Mudsdale was able to take advantage of that to KO the Glow King from near full. Plus, it got a good amount of damage on the Rhydon before going down, so Mudsdale, really, really nice showing performance here. Give at least something to chat here. He had a really nice Blaziken play. We got an Ice Beam crit on the Pincurchin to bring that extremely low after tanking a very impressive hit. And then predicted the Blaziken switch and got a nice Water Pulse off, but really from there Blaziken did basically the rest of the breaking that was needed from the team, KOing the Glaceon and then getting a nice little priority attack on the Cinccino before going down, later forcing it out, and then come back in on rocks to KO that. Chad had a nice Wakanberry on the Moltres Galar, but really Jimmy was just in full control the whole time, was able to clean up pretty effectively, with the Aromatisse at the end actually putting in a good amount of work for him too. Not necessarily his top tier picks doing everything for him, just really impressive, just in control from the very beginning. Maybe a couple suspect plays from Chad, but maybe it was just the pressure exerted by Jimmy. Very impressive win. What do you have to say about our number 1 seed who is still undefeated?
A very important member of his team that is here and was mentioned, but was not discussed for his performance in the battle, the number 12 overall pick, Decidueye, who did not make an appearance in this 3-0 victory. Still, bringing it occasionally, sometimes not, though. A lot of just waiting on the bench, waiting probably for those buffs to carry over from Pokemon Unite into the main series games. But I don't think they'll quite make it in time. So we'll see if Decidueye, as it is, can amount to much more than it has in these past couple of weeks.
It's a little bit scary to think that he's performing this well without Decidueye doing much to carry the team as one of his 100-point picks. So definitely look for even better things from Jimmy potentially in the future here. But we're going to next talk about our other undefeated team, and that is the Summit County Psyducks. Steve, tell us about their victory over the Cincinnati Incineroar.
Yes, so the Psyducks brought a team of Gliscopod, Salazzle, Mantine, Claydol, Boltund, and Leafeon, and were able to pilot to a 3-0 victory over the Cincinnati Incineroar. The early game had a lot of pivots for both teams going back and forth into favorable matchups. One of the early mounts to go down was the Psyducks Mantine, who was too stressed, having to come into wall turn threats as well as remove the rocks, try and keep itself healthy, and ultimately fell to a little bit unlucky Rock Blast 5 hit. However, with that key defensive piece down, the Psyducks had to turn to a much more offensive take and make some big risks, especially with Gliscopod. Early on, able to come in and hit my co-host here quite super effectively and remove him from the battle, as well as staying in on an anti-attempting to set up, predicting the switch, and Gliscopod cleanly taking out the Incineroar's big hitter with one attack. At that point, really set the tone as the Psyducks in control of the battle. They did, throughout the rest of the game, lose that control a little bit, losing both the Claydol and Boltund for minimal gains. However, when it came down to the end, the remaining 3 Mons were able to pivot into favorable matchups. Gliscopod able to pick off one more before the Leafeon came in, walling the rest of the remaining team and easily removing them all. Overall, the Psyducks kind of had a mixed performance here. There were some members who didn't quite do as much as they were hoping for, but others, especially the Leafeon Gliscopod, who certainly carried the weight of this team. So we'll see how they can do in future weeks. Nate, you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, someone who picked up Claydol at the end of last regular season, I can't say it is a little disappointing to see Claydol do nothing, but honestly, that's just about what you expect from Claydol. It's really nice on the team, or theoretically, as a nice little rock resist, as a nice way to rapid spin, take a little bit of pressure off that Mantine. But in practice, it really hasn't done much of anything through the first 4 weeks for Zach, even though he's really been favoring bringing that quite often. Couldn't even really wall the Hitmonchan. And yeah, the Mantine going down early definitely was a big issue. I definitely agree with that. We saw later whenever Hitmonchan didn't really have a great switch in anymore, and had to resort to the Claydol, which couldn't tank a couple of Ice Punches. And then later, even more so, when Espeon came and he had to sack a nearly full health Boltund to a Psychic because he just didn't have the switch. That said, I definitely agree. He had really nice, smart, aggressive decisions, which is a playstyle he had to pivot to, just given the state of what had happened to the Mantine and then later the Claydol. Honestly, well played. I love seeing the Gliscopod putting in that much work. We saw how tanky it was, too. Took a hit after switching in a couple of smaller hits and was able to stay out of emergency exit range and just put in a ton of work, which was an awesome breaking piece to see happen. Really excited to see him dive a little bit more into some of those pieces he has and show off the depth of his team. So now we're going to move on to the number 3 pick for us, and that is going to be the Route 1 Burbs, who had a very close 1-0 victory over the Close Combat Club, who we also mentioned. This was an awesome game. As you can definitely tell, it came down to the wire. So the Route 1 Burbs brought a team of Raichu, Shuckle, Lycanroc, Vaporeon, Charizard, and Liepard. And for the sake of completion here, the Close Combat Club brought the Manectric, Comfey, Jellicent, Porygon Z, Registeel, and Alolan Exeggutor, which once again was a 1-0 victory in the Route 1 Burbs' favor, who remain at the number 3 spot. At the start of the battle, that Sandstorm Shuckle was very funny. It walled the PZ pretty effectively. I feel like that was definitely what it was for. Sandstorm, of course, raising the special defense of the Shuckle, and then an Infestation, guaranteeing a good bit of damage onto it. Not to mention that whenever it did switch out, it was able to speed up the Lycanroc with that Sandstorm and the Sand Rush ability, which is really funny. Also very funny early was an interaction where the Lycanroc ended up getting burned from a Tri-Attack while trying to set up, and then it didn't really matter because it got a crit the very next turn, so that was very enjoyable to watch for sure. Route 1 Burbs may be a little bit of a suspect play. I appreciated them getting the Vaporeon in there to heal Bell up the Lycanroc, identifying that as incredibly crucial later on in the game. But on the next turn, on a wish, left it in against the Alolan Exeggutor, who was able to take it out with a Leaf Storm, very strong attack, and got rid of an incredibly crucial defensive piece that could have walled things like the Jellicent much better, especially when you look at the rest of his team. That would have been crucial. Later, also got a little bit lucky too. It's tough to ever justify running Focus Blast, but when you hit 2 in a row that do 50% exactly to the Alolan Exeggutor, which was a big threat, then maybe Raichu can afford to run that. Very, very critical hits there, without being a critical hit itself. That was awesome. The Alolan Exeggutor, aside from the Charizard, could have ripped through the Route 1 Burbs team. That was a big, big deal. Also a big deal, Overheat miss on turn 25 against the Liepard. Liepard was down pretty darn low, and getting the KO onto that would have prevented quite a few shenanigans. Yes, the Liepard was able to trick a Lagging Tail onto the Manectric, but honestly, at that point, you really need to not save the Manectric, but really the Jellicent looked like the big issue there. Having to sack it then a couple of turns later just to try and get the bad items onto something a little more reasonable was a little bit rough. Would have been nice to try and maybe save the Jellicent to try and get it back in against something like a Shuckle, where it could recover up and then be able to take on the Lycanroc or Charizard. But unfortunately, that's kind of how the cookie crumbles. Sometimes you miss those 90% overheats, and that's what has to happen. Don't really know for sure what could have happened, but I think that would have been a much better scenario for him. It definitely also felt like there were some wasted turns there, switcherooing maybe on both sides a little bit, but it definitely felt like for John the Close Combat Club, a little bit of time was wasted trying to switcheroo items around and away, and it could have ended up being detrimental in wasting a few turns that could have been crucial. As we see, John was about one turn behind in this battle, and maybe a turn where he switcherooed where he didn't have to was the wrong play, or maybe missing an overheat was the wrong play. Either way, this was a very close battle, very fun, very cool to see them try and break through each other's pieces, try and preserve and get into good positioning, especially through things like switcheroo. And 1-0 victory, wow, very impressive from both sides, very fun match. What do you think of this one, Steve?
It was a fantastic match. As John tends to do with his matchups, it did take a little bit longer to play out, but that, of course, happens. On the side of the Burbs, I'd really like to shout out the Shuckle, and honestly the creative sets in general, which have mainly been taking form through the Shuckle. It's always a surprise to see what Michael's bringing and what crazy ideas he has and what works. Of course, the Shuckle's kind of been the focus of it this season and kind of been leaning on the Shuckle. Perhaps other teams will start preparing more for this 40-point Mon, but then again, if they are, they're over-preparing for a 40-point Mon, and the rest of his team might come to surprise them. So it's exciting to see how that dynamic will play out through the second half of the season.
Absolutely. Definitely a great highlight of the creativity that's come out. It seems like a different set every week, whereas in normal play, you only see Shuckle with about one set that it ever does. So very cool from Michael. Love the creativity. And then to round out the top four, we've been dancing around it just a little bit, but your two co-hosts here, we just faced off against each other in week 4, and well, we don't have to talk too much about this one, not because I don't want you to, of course I do, because this is the featured match, so definitely go check out that on this channel as well from Matt or Cat Measles. Steve, tell us just a little bit about the match to get a little taste of what happened in my 1-0 victory over you.
Yes, so the way this match went, the Bouffalant brought a team of Aerodactyl, Tentacle, Steelix, Passimian, Guzzlord, and Clawter against my team of Chandelure, Sharpedo, Escavalier, Pillowswine, Verizian, and Archeops. And as you mentioned, the Bouffalant did secure a 1-0 victory. A couple of highlights of this, the Mons that put in kind of the most work from both sides. The Archeops from the Wobbuffets put in a lot of pressure, especially early in the game, really opening some holes. And the highlight, of course, from the Bouffalant's team would have to be the Guzzlord at the end, cleaning things up and really breaking through things at the end when it needed to. As for this matchup, a fantastic matchup. I'm sure next time we'll both try and prepare more for our opponent's stars, although I think it'll be a little easier for you to prepare for Archeops than me preparing for Guzzlord.
What can I say? Guzzlord is just the truth. I can also say I almost did not bring the Stealth Rocks. Very glad I included that last mid. It feels like that ended up being crucial in trying to force you to pivot around those. And finally, pay attention to speed EVs, kids. That was definitely crucial for both sides there. We both cheated a little bit and kind of got away with it to varying degrees of success there. So speed EVs, very fun and interesting. While we're on the screen too, I want to go real quick about, which kind of discussed with you, are the numbers 1 and 2 teams are both 4-0, and the number 3 and 4 teams are both 3-1. We had a little bit of a discussion last time, but to tell our folks a little bit about why we chose to put the Noctuls ahead of the Psyducks this time, even though they're both 4-0, and why we decided to have the Route 1 Burbs ahead of the Bouffalant, even though both of us are 3-1.
Yeah, so for the 4-0 teams, especially looking at this week, and you may have caught on this as we talked about, we felt that the Noctuls had a little bit more of a dominant win, as it were. They seemed more in control of the match throughout and really demonstrated their battle readiness. And, between the two of them, it could change week to week if they both stay undefeated. However, I suspect one of them will lose pretty soon. For the Burbs and Bouffalant, this came down to their losses. The Burbs, of course, having that week 1 loss to the Psyducks that came because of a stone edge miss. Otherwise, I would have turned that, I believe it was a 0-4 loss into about a 4-0 win. So kind of huge swing there, just based on hitting that 20% miss. On the side of the Bouffalant, they lost week 2 to the Close Combat Club. Just based on the teams they lost to as well as other teams they played, it kind of seemed like the Burbs have had a little bit better faring against other quality opponents, so we gave them the nudge there.
Unfortunately, we will not be facing off this season. However, last season we did face off in the postseason after not playing in the regular season. Anything can happen once we get just a few more games under each other's belts and kind of see how people fare against each other. Maybe we'll be able to see or tell a little bit more accurately. Now, there is one more thing we do have to talk about before we talk about next week's matches, and that is the transactions. One coach made a flurry of transactions that we absolutely need to talk about. We're talking about Chad and the Seattle Steamrollers at 2-2, just suffering another loss here, this one to the Noctuls, who they had fallen to in the finals in Season 8. And after that, immediately after almost, made quite a few significant transactions. We're talking Araquanid being traded out, a 100-point Mon that provided Sticky Webs out for the Arctivish, and Throw, a 40-point fighting type that he has not brought yet for Abomasnow. Yeah, we're going to see a Hail core here, a little bit of a mini core. Listen, the sincerest form of flattery is imitation, and I do appreciate you taking after the Arctivish here. A couple more transactions that happened. The Rhydon was traded out for the Drudagon, and the Tauros, one of the mons that Chad very much favored at the beginning of the draft, traded out for a mere Calyrex. So this is kind of an interesting dynamic, Steve. He's really changed up the overall look of the team, trading out Sticky Webs, trading out the sturdiness that Throw and Rhydon provided, as well as some of the speed and power from Tauros, just for that a chance for that Hail Core, and Drudagon itself from the 80-point tier. What stands out about these transactions, and what do you think this does to his team overall?
What really stands out for this is Lettuce, Baby Lettuce, making it their first appearance. Really excited for that. But outside of that, what really stands out is what this does to the type chart for the Seattle Steamrollers. Previously, there were a couple types that were a little suspect, and now it's just all over the place. There's tons of overlapping types, such that, especially looking at things like the fire weakness, there's Drudagon as a resist, and then 6 Pokemon weak to fire, and the rest being neutral. Huge fire weakness, as well as no steel resists. Only one rock was resist with a number of weaknesses. And then, of course, there are other types like water, where there's 5 resists and no weaknesses, or grass, with, I believe, 8 resists and 1 weakness. All over the place. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the team with such a kind of stacked type matchup will fare.
Yeah, I know we've talked a little bit about how important offense has appeared to be in this league. It seems like people tend to swing either to faster matches or to longer, drawn-out matches with things like Wish and Heal Bell, just because they are able to tank some of the offense in this season. This definitely leans more towards an all-in strategy on one side or another here, depending on how he wants to play it. Either way, though, the answers to those strategies may end up being the same just because those types. We see 3 ice types, 3 grass types. This is very interesting to see that he may just go all in on the Arctivish, or may go all in 1 week on just a Glow King setup and sweep. This is super fascinating to me. I do trust Chad as a coach. I know he knows what he's doing, and I trust his playing abilities for sure after besting me the past couple of times he's played, but I really wonder if this is going to be the play or not. He still has a whole, I believe, 1 transaction left to try and fix things up, unless anybody is looking out there for a trade for some of these interesting mons that he has acquired throughout the season. Now, any other comments before we move on? Perhaps about that Tauros?
Oh man, the Tauros. I recall before the draft, Chad speaking high praises of the Tauros. Can't believe it fell all the way to him. I believe, 7th, 8th overall? Real early pick, first round pick. Can't believe it was available for 40 points. What a steal. And now it's a piece of lettuce. What a fitting end. Many of us, I know you and I included, had doubts about how effective Tauros would be, and it feels right to be vindicated in that. We'll see. Maybe Chad can enlighten us a little more about why he thought it would be good, and if it just didn't work with the team, or if there were other reasons that he had to drop it. But we'll certainly see.
Pretty interesting that he then picked up the Cinccino immediately after in the draft, having 2 months that do almost the same thing, only to then trade one of them out for a piece of lettuce. So we got a very interesting second half of the season. I'll be keeping a close eye on this, see if he does any kind of interesting experimentation with the team or how straightforward it's going to end up being. So that's going to be it for the halfway mark here. That was week 4 in a nutshell. And boy, do we have some awesome week 5 matches coming up here soon too. You've got the Castforms and the Bouffalant. Skip over that second one for just a moment. We've got a moderator matchup here, the Wobbuffets and the Incineroar grudge match. The Miltanks and Steamrollers, where we get to see the debut of Chad's new and improved team. Close Combat Club and the Agrons. Agrons looking for a chance to try and get on this list. And the Route 1 Burbs facing off against another bird team in the Oricorios. But really, that match I skipped over, Steve, is the big one. The Psyducks and the Noctuls. You hinted at it earlier, but the two undefeated teams are going against each other. What do you think about that matchup?
Oh, this is really going to determine who is going to really get that grasp on that number one spot. The winner of this, really, there's no counterclaims at that point. It's pretty set in stone. Of course, that only lasts for a week until other matches may shift and more. But this really will set, both in terms of power rankings and actual rankings, the number one team.
Absolutely. We've got some other coaches that are biting at the bit to get ahead of them, too. I know I will face both of them in weeks 6 and 7 right after. I know they're not going to be happy to face me after having to face each other. So this is going to be very interesting. I'd say that was the match to watch for sure, but maybe some of these other ones will surprise us and we'll get a little bit of a shake-up going here, too. Because it seems like we have a pretty clear-cut top half or top 7 or so of the league. Maybe others can start making a splash. So that's going to do it for Week 4 Power Rankings. Definitely check out that feature match as well. You know you'll love to see me dunking on Steve at least a little bit in what could have been the match of the season. But next time we'll see you here for the Week 5 Power Rankings, rather. We'll see you then.